For everyone with an interest in NASH, or more broadly fatty liver disease, Surf's Up, Season 4, Episode 43 of the podcast, still, but not for that much longer, known as Surfing the NASH Tsunami. Our discussions with Rachel Zayas and Michelle Long about a couple of career challenges and how to prevail as an entrepreneur or in transition from academia to commercial medicine starts now.
Today on Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
What you need to do is ask yourself what data you need to show in the smallest possible way that what you're doing is functional and superior to other tools on the market, and why. It takes a village to get a product to market. It's not one team and one company, but rather an entire ecosystem.
A prepared mind is open to change. This is exactly what I've been craving. This is exactly how I like to do science.
You're describing academia in a way that feels to me like being right under the surface and not having any clue what's on the other side.
My bias was that it's all commercial and that you have to have like a business degree in order to make a splash and to be seen as valuable. But now I jokingly call it Novo Nordisk University. It is as rich a research environment that I have ever been in and I could ever dream of being in.
As the number of available topics and respondents in steatotic liver disease explodes, this podcast will devote every other week to interviews on a single facet of science or commercial issues. This week, pricing and forecasting guru Roger Green interviews Diagnostics CEO Rachel Zayas on the path to entrepreneurship and the art of pitching for money, and then speaks with Novo Nordisk International Vice President Michelle Long on the transition from academia to commerce.
Hi, this is Roger Green, host of the podcast still known as Surfing the NASH Tsunami. As I mentioned last week, we are responding to the ever-expanding range of topics people want to hear about by converting every other week from a typical episode into a series of interviews, usually on a specific topic, and frequently on a topic that's not exactly scientific. This is the first of the series, which we are dubbing Career Week. It has two interviews. First, Diagnostics CEO Rachel Zayas talks about her path to entrepreneurship, how she spends most of her time these days. Spoiler alert, most of it has to do with money, and what she's learned about how to win new venture competitions with two recent wins under her belt. Bravo, Rachel. Next, Novo Nordisk International Vice President Michelle Long talks about her transition last year from academia to commercial medicine, why she is so happy with her move, and what others in academia might think about when asking whether this is a good career switch for them. Afterwards, I'll talk a bit in the business report about some of our 2024 planning. So to start, here's Rachel Zayas. So one of our interviews this week is with Rachel Zayas, a longtime friend of the podcast who's been up to exciting stuff recently and hasn't been on the podcast for a while. Hey, Rachel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm calling in from sunny Palo Alto. How are you today?
I was about to ask you where in the world you were today. There's this kind of Carmen Sandiego quality to dealing with you because you're spending enough time in California and other places. I'm fine. It's 80 degrees and sunny here in beautiful New Hope. So you and I are both having sunny days. How long are you in California for?
I'm out here for 16 days. I am hopping between Anaheim, Palo Alto, and then back to Anaheim again for a series of conferences and events.
Most of this conversation is going to be about fundraising and pitching and what our listeners who are nascent or early stage entrepreneurs or think maybe they want to be entrepreneurs can learn from your experience. But first, just take a couple of minutes and at a very high level, tell us how Agent is doing. What you've been up to.
Yes. So we have multiple clinical trial sites. We are recruiting for a 500 patient study. We also are conducting sequencing with Walter Reed Military Center and the American Genome Center. So that is an exciting collaboration. And we have some new hires on the team that will be coming with us to the American Association for Study of Liver Disease. They will be starting in just a couple weeks. So exciting new team members and lots of fundraising. Once you start fundraising as a founder, you never stop. So that's just part of the daily and weekly grind. mind.
So without getting overly personal, I will tell our listeners that the fact that AASLD is in Boston means you get to go home, huh? Home.
Is.
Not where you're living now, but home.
Home. Yes. I grew up there, born and raised in Cambridge, Mass, down the street from the Human Genome Project, which is why I wanted to go into genetics in the first place. It'll be nice to be home and see the family. So it is multifaceted going back for AASLD.
So you said, and I think this is the point, once as a founder you start fundraising, you never stop fundraising. Let's educate our listeners a little bit on what that feels like.
Yeah. Well, I'll take a 10,000-foot view before going into the nitty-gritty. But there was a quote I heard once. I don't remember who said it, but they said that the social responsibility of a company is to it increases profits. And, while not everything is a for-profit corporation, increasing profits can also mean increasing impact. So I think that is something that I've taken very seriously since day one. We started with grants from the National Science Foundation. Then we started with a really early stage, I would say, friends and family round where professors of ours came and wanted to invest and really go through very early, small proof of principle studies. Then we went into a pre-seed round, and now we're in a larger seed to get us through the next 12 to 24 months. I can go more in depth into any of those and the nuances involved. But one thing that I think is really important to note is that, especially in the biotech space, data is everything. So you don't need to raise 1 to 5 million to show that your tools are functional and efficacious. What you need to do is ask yourself what data you need to show in the smallest possible way that what you're doing is functional and superior to other tools on the market, and why. So we designed these micro studies very early on to show investors and collaborators that, hey, this is functional. This is functional both directly in the liver as well as in peripheral blood. And here's the data we have to show that this supports our hypotheses and our claims. And then we'll take that information and say, hey, we've shown that this is efficacious. Now let's replicate this study in a larger sample size. And it doesn't need to be full-blown 1,000 patients, but something just a little bit more intentional and small to show efficacy.
What kind of sample size do you feel, in your case at least, you've needed to get to, or you will need to get to be ready really for prime time and to step up? And how did you determine that number? And is there anything else that makes that study special people should understand?
Where we are today is we've done analyses on several hundred patient samples. That is a combination of both direct liver tissue as well as blood samples, all inclusive. So our next study is going to be a 500 patient study to show efficacy for both of our two tools. We're developing two tools, one that can differentiate simple steatosis from NASH, and then a second tool based off of a separate set of biomarkers that can stage liver fibrosis on a 4-stage sliding scale. So what we're doing now is we're doing a verification study where we're expanding the sample size to 500 patient samples. And without introducing bias, we're still conducting whole genome sequencing in this data set. We know what our top 30 candidate biomarkers are for each of our two tools. We know what the top 5 candidate biomarkers are. But before we are married to those candidate biomarkers, we want the data to speak for itself. So if this 500 patient study will allow us to discern which of these biomarkers is reproducible, replicatable from our previous studies, and a couple last points there reflect both biological relevance to other genes, proteins, and transcriptional expression that has been reported for other, let's say, therapeutics and other findings in the NASH and fibrosis space. So the 500, this will be a pivotal study for us. And then next year, we'll start recruiting for about a 2,000 patient study that will last about 1 to 2 years.
As somebody with real fascination in behavioral economics and commercial psychology, what's the magic to 500 and 2,000?
What we did was, so the 500 was actually based off of a study that, and I'm blanking on the name of the study at this moment, but there was a targeted epigenetic sequencing assessment for hepatocellular carcinoma that was approved through FDA breakthrough designation. They had 450 patient samples in this study, of which only 200 it had various stages of hepatocellular carcinoma. So what we wanted was to match that study based off of what the FDA outlined for the sample size and powering of tools for liver cancer. So we saw that and we said, okay, for our pivotal study, we're going to mimic this sample size and mimic this power. However, we know and we're keenly aware that there are various underlying causes of fatty liver disease. Think of it like this. A 17-year-old Hispanic female with diabetes and obesity may or may not have the same biomarkers at the same concentration of a 72-year-old European male with diabetes and obesity. And in one sense, in one side of the argument, there's 1,000 ways to cut the pie. But in another place, in another means to tackle this challenge, there's also a logical way to address this problem. So we powered this study to ensure efficacy in these discrete patient populations. So the 2,000 is not random. It's been powered by what we need in certain age, race, ethnicity, underlying causes, and things of that sort to ensure efficacy in these discrete patient populations. What you often see is that biomarkers in very early stages of development from small sample size have really great sensitivity and specificity all throughout all of the studies that they conduct. But then when they go to conduct real-world analysis and they actually get into the clinic, that drops off, the AROC drops off by 10, 15, even 20+%. And it is a testament to poor research and development methods that don't reflect the patient populations that you will serve when you get to the market. So the 2000 is based off of intentional design methods that are powered to ensure efficacy in these discrete patient populations.
Pardon, the stat nerd in me has a real simple question, which is, so did you build the 2000 by stratifying sample for specific subpopulations, or are you going for 2000 and assuming that on the random distribution you'll wind up with what you need, or somewhere in the middle?
The latter, yeah.
It's a better way to sample it. And in pursuit of funding for all this, you've been out raising money, right? So first of all, I want to congratulate you. Recently, I understand that you've won 2 competitions, one a life science competition and the other a broader entrepreneurial competition, both while you're out in California. And we'll talk about that in a sec. But before we get there, is there anything about raising money that people thinking about going down this line might not know that they should have known before they started? Say that you should have known before you started?
Oh, so many things. I could talk to you about this for several hours, but I will go through the high-level points. Fundraising is a partnership. You're not applying to a fund or a VC or an angel network to compel them. It is a two-way road. It is a partnership. So with that, some important things that are essential early on is make sure that you're pursuing funds that have a strategic fit. So ensure that they are fundraising at this stage, whether it's the seed, the Series A, the Series B, that they funded companies that are in your space, whether it's a medical device or therapeutic or something that is AI-based. And ensure that companies that they have invested in the past have alignment with what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then last, but certainly not least, this partnership aspect can't be understated. So we are very selective with who we've worked with for VCs that we allowed to come onto our cap table, because it is not just us going out begging people for money, but rather it is a long-term partnership and a strategic partnership. So as much as VCs are vetting you and evaluating your team, traction, market opportunity, you need to be vetting them as well. Are they respectful? Are they responsive? Are they going to help us make introductions for the next raise? Are they going to be open to communication when things don't work out? Because things won't work out the way that you plan. That is part of business. That is part of life. For every founder that is out there raising, remember you're vetting them just as much as they are vetting you, and you must make that front and center. I promise it'll get you to a lot of no's quicker, but it will also weed out the people you don't want to be working with. So,
well, a lot of those make sense. I mean, if you think about the major drug development rule in big pharma is quick kills are the best thing you can do. What you don't want to do is hang around on a hope for a while and then take a very expensive kill or have wasted a lot of time. So I'm guessing this is kind of the same thing on a smaller scale, right?
Yes.
So
precisely.
With that, then you go into competitions. So how many competitions have you been in, say, the last year, if you had to guess?
I would say in the last year, I've probably been in maybe 30 to 40 competitions. Not all of them have been for money. A lot of them have been for networking purposes. So there's a lot in person. I think that is the most impactful way to find new collaborators, new investors, new prospective hires. Being there in person is really worth its weight in gold because you can pick up on energy, intentionality, and who these people really are on both sides and who we are as a company as well.
So what's the value of, this may sound like a really stupid question, but what's the value of winning, particularly if there's no money in that particular competition?
Well, there's no money. After the competition we won a few weeks ago, it was with the Pepperdine University Graduate School. This was actually a 3 to 6 month due diligence process. It was one of the most intensive due diligence processes that we've ever been through. There was 5 rounds in this competition. It started with 3,000 companies, and they ended up selecting the top 15 of those 3,000 to come and pitch on their pitch day in sunny Malibu, California. With that, well, each of us are winners and have shown market traction. The individuals in the room are investors and collaborators. So while there was no money associated with this competition, exactly, there was a lot of investors in the room, family offices, VCs, angel networks. I really do have to say that one of our goals for this year was to continuously come out to California because the fundraising landscape is a lot different than the East Coast. So we wanted to diversify our fundraising outreach strategy, and it's been quite fruitful. So these competitions, well, there's not always money associated with them. There's network effects and impact, and there are a lot of investors in the room.
When you get to the final pitch on this stuff, well, that's cart ahead of horse. So the rounds of due diligence are basically intended to winnow out on what grounds in general?
Excellent question. So clear communication on product market fit. So you are developing something that can solve a large and unmet need, whether that's in the medical space, the social impact space, aerospace, and anything in between. Large, unmet need, product market fit, traction, capability of executing, team. Team is really important. I'm a strong believer that you can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have a team that has good chemistry between one another and then can execute effectively together, you really don't have much. Forget the competition. There's nothing more important than who's sitting in your boat and who's steering the ship together.
Mm-hmm. But how many people actually come to competition with you, or are you there alone in the final round?
This one was just me out here, but we have a few new hires that are coming onto the team in the next couple weeks. So they will be traveling with me going forward, and I'm really excited to have them there to make an impact.
So talk about Pepperdine for a minute. You say that was not just healthcare, that was an all-commerce kind of a competition, right?
Yes.
You get an announcement. What does the announcement say in the end?
We had a handful of investors that we've been in due diligence with for the last couple months, and this was kind of the decision tree to tip them over in favor of investing. So first and foremost, well, there wasn't capital involved. There is at the end of the day, because a lot of investors want to see that others agree with their assessment. As you were talking about earlier, behavioral economics is real, and it couldn't be more front and center in investing as well. So you'd hope to think that investors are impartial and objective in their analyses of companies, but it really couldn't be anything further than the truth. And that's no knock on any of our investors that are listening, because at the end of the day, we are not machines. We're humans, and we are subject to biases. So when you see that others are investing and supporting a company and an entity, it makes you want to jump on that bandwagon as well. So there's been a lot of investors that have now sought to close our round of due diligence in favor of investing. So that's been wonderful. There are new faces in the room and new connections we will be making with Pepperdine Business School, as well as a lot of physicians in that area as well. So it's multifaceted in that capacity.
And as you point out, it's sunny Malibu. It's not a bad place to have to hang out.
It's not a bad place at all. Yeah, it was beautiful.
So in the final presentation, what exactly were you presenting?
I actually spoke about why the liver. Why should anyone care about the liver? So I really tried to present a hook, which was a synthesis between what we've been developing in research and what we can and cannot do right now. I think one of my opening lines is that, did you know that we can send a nanoparticle to navigate the circulatory system, target a specific organ, release a therapeutic in an orchestrated manner to treat disease, but we can't use that same circulatory system to determine when one of the most important organs is in trouble. So I think that the why and why one should care should always be part of the hook and the opening. So why the liver? Why this technology? And then going a little bit more specific into the market opportunity, our competitive advantage, our traction, and where we are today to really paint the picture of, okay, we've delivered on other milestones and goals that we've had previously, and here's what we're going to do next, and here's how we're going to do it, and here are the collaborators we built to get here. So all of that is to say, here's why this is a great company to invest in, to collaborate with, to support.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Is there anything that's not obvious about what you want to do in a pitch like that you're comfortable sharing with a broader audience?
We didn't start here randomly. So we did a year and a half, maybe 2 years of product market fit and conducting customer discovery to get to where we are today. So we didn't just happen upon NASH and liver diseases. We spoke to the market to get here. So a lot of things that are not obvious is that this is the shiny box present that you present out to the world, but there's a lot of work that goes into every element beneath the surface. There are years and years of research, pivoting, intentionality for every aspect of the company that one often does not see in these competitions.
Do I recall correctly that you actually started out not in the liver, but in oncology? I remember correctly?
Yeah. So we actually started out in the liver, but with hepatocellular carcinoma. And we were traveling for a grant that we had gotten with the National Science Foundation maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And we were at a hepatology conference at MD Anderson. And there was a transplant surgeon that had said that, who cares about developing tools for liver cancer? If you don't know who's high risk for liver cancer, you will never catch these patients early. So I said, okay, tell me more. Where do you recommend starting and why? How efficacious are the tools that are currently there? How big is this problem? And that's when we pivoted to NASH. Of course, we took that one data point from that sample size of 1, and then we went to 5 other conferences to talk to several hundred other physicians, payers, and key stakeholders to really ensure efficacy of that hypothesis before we pivoted to NASH. So we didn't start here, and you have to be humble, open, and admit when you're wrong. That's just part of the entrepreneurship journey.
We have an audience of people who play various roles in this system. Let's say with this process for a minute, and then I'll go back to Ajit at the end. What else would you like to share with people about how this process works? So that'd be the first question. Then I've got 2 more. The
process of fundraising or the process to get a commercialized product to market?
I was going to start on fundraising, and then I was going to step back and say, okay, where does that fit into getting to market? So you could take them both at once, all right?
I think that one important know-how with fundraising, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'll drive this home here, is that you need to be very intentional with what investors you allow on your cap table. I think that just as team is important, every stakeholder in your company is important too. So you need to do your due diligence on them. We do reference checks. We do multiple reference checks. We talk to other founders that work with investors to really get a firsthand experience of what it's like to work with them long term, because there's money out there. You can always raise money. If you are intentional, if you've identified product market fit, there's capital out there, but it's the right capital that will get you from point A to point B seamlessly and supportive.
So then that's the capital part. Broadening beyond that to other keys to commercialization from where you sit right now.
Strategic partnerships are quite critical. So it takes a village to get a product to market. It's not one team and one company, but rather an entire ecosystem. So while we're out here in California quite often to fundraise, we are very proud to be a Maryland company. So Maryland has a wonderful VC fund called TEDCO. So TEDCO is our lead investor for this current round. And as part of that investment, what they did was they said, hey, the Henry Jackson Foundation is recruiting new biotech companies to their labs. So the Henry Jackson Foundation is a congressionally mandated nonprofit of the U.S. military focused on the advancement of military medicine. So as part of our investment from TEDCO, they said, would you move your headquarters to this space to continue to build and grow within Henry Jackson Foundation and the greater DoD? So we were quite ecstatic at the opportunity, because this comes with lab space partnerships within DoD and things of that sort that really we couldn't fathom or execute successfully on our own. So this has opened the window to collaborations with Walter Reed Military Center, as well as a few other military centers throughout the United States and as well as the VA. And so you can't do it alone. These corporate and strategic partnerships are gold. So that's the most important thing that we've learned in the last few months.
So what benefits do you get out of working with DoD in particular? I mean, there's a follow-up, but leave it there.
So Henry Jackson Foundation, which is based out of Bethesda, Maryland, they have ample lab space, and they're looking to recruit additional biotech companies to be out of their life science hub. So what this comes with is support for CLIA certification. So when we launch, which might be going into your next set of questions, but when we launch, we actually won't go through FDA approval first, but we'll actually go through CLIA approval. It will certify the lab and launch as a lab-developed test, otherwise known as an LDT. So working with Henry Jackson Foundation, they're certifying the labs to have CLIA certification. So this is expensive, both from a certification standpoint as well as a lab equipment standpoint. It's nuanced, and they've done this previously. So these partnerships allow us to get to market in a time, cost-effective, and strategic manner with those who have done so previously and successfully.
Okay, so then keep rolling and tell us why CLIA LDT is compared to getting FDA approval.
Back to what I was alluding to earlier, in the sense that while 2,000 patients may be an ample sample size to show efficacy of our tools, we see a cost and time-effective strategy of going through CLIA first before then going through the FDA. So this allows us to then perform in the market for 2 to 3 years to ensure efficacy of our tools. So in the event that we have introduced bias into our analysis from our preclinical studies, what this will allow us to do is ensure that we can have a successful market launch. So CLIA is cheaper and faster than going through FDA, and it allows us to operate in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And, there's always limitations to both paths, but CLIA is a means to the next stage of development. High level there.
Okay, great. So if everything went well, when will we expect to see your first product in market?
We're looking at maybe Q3 of 2025. So we're looking at the next 18 to 24 months away from market launch.
Cool. That'd be great. I think that's, as far as I go, that's it for today. We've talked to you a bunch on this podcast. It's always been about science, and you're one of the few people we deal with regularly who's doing what you're doing. So, and as I said, we do get questions from time to time from people saying, what should I be thinking about as I start to build my business, as I start to raise money, as I start to. So this is great for all that. I'm hoping you'll be able to join our AASLD coverage and go back to talking about epigenetics, microbiome, basic science, all the things that our audience does and loves you for best. But thank you for taking the time today. Enjoy the rest of your trip to beautiful sunny California, both Palo Alto and Anaheim, and if you get back to Malibu, which is always a great place. And we'll see you soon, Rachel.
Thank you, Roger. Always a wonderful opportunity to speak on the podcast. Thank you for all your support.
The pleasure's ours. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
And batting second, here's Michelle Long. So the second half of our Career Week interviews, we have with us our friend Michelle Long. The first time we met Michelle on this podcast, she was in academia up in Boston doing her hepatologic epidemiology work. I think I got all that out without screwing up any of the syllables, and seemingly happy with what you were doing. And then I turn around and you're on your way to Novo Nordisk, and that was, I guess, about 14, 15 months ago?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, about a third of this audience is academic, and I'm going to casually guess some of those people, if they had a chance to do it, if they knew how to get there, would like to be where you are now as compared to where you were then. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about your experience, what motivated you to want to do it, how the transition works, what people can learn from all that. And then, by the way, we'll talk a little bit after that about NASH, but let's stay here to start. First of all, where are you today?
So I'm in Princeton, New Jersey today, actually, visiting the Novo Nordisk U.S. affiliate office.
So you live in Boston, right, still?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How much of your time do you get to spend in Boston these days?
So my setup actually is that I work for Novo Nordisk in Denmark. So I work for the headquarters team. So actually, this is the first time I've gone to the U.S. affiliate office in New Jersey, but I'm in Boston and I work remotely. And then I go to Denmark about 1 week every other month.
That's not bad at all. Except for the fact that you go to conferences and stuff like that. That's probably about as much as your family got to see you when you were in academia, just to guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I still go to the same conferences I was going to before.
So let's go back 18 months or however. Well, actually, maybe it's not 18 months. When was it that you first were contacted about this idea of coming to Novo Nordisk?
Yeah, I would say it was about 18 months ago that I was first contacted, and then I started in July of 22.
Was that something that you had been looking to do, or was it something that just landed on you, or how did all this come about?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say it landed on me. I wasn't looking actively, but at the same time, I had an open mind. Also, a prepared mind is open to change. And that's where they found me when they came looking 18 months ago.
A prepared mind is open to change. That's a great statement. Could you please elaborate a little bit about how you were prepared?
So I would say that I was prepared because I also saw others go through this transition, including some people that were very close to me. My primary research mentor at the Framingham Heart Study, Caroline Fox, in 2015, she had left a tenured track position. She was an intramural researcher, scientist at NHLBI and working at the Framingham Heart Study. And, to me, had the dream job, right? She was fully supported to do science. She could mentor, she could teach, she could keep her clinic, and she didn't have to apply for grants. I mean, it was really amazing. It was such a gift actually having her as a mentor because she actually had time to mentor me properly and was hugely influenced my career. She is the voice that's in my head. We would meet once a week for an hour. I mean, it was a gift of time that you can never get from a mentor. Anyway, she actually left this, to me at the time, seemed like a dream job to take a position at Merck and to lead their pharmacogenetics and pharmacogenomics in diabetes. When she left, she said, keep an open mind, Michelle. Like, you never know where science is going to take you. And she was really, really keen on making sure that we as young scientists, her mentees, understood that there are different career paths to take in academics and that there are pluses and minuses, but not to just shut something down because it's unknown. So she definitely gave me the courage to say, okay, I told Caroline that I would keep an open mind, and here we are.
So you were cruising along, and then they kind of found you.
Yeah, that's right.
How did that process start? How did it go? When you look back on the period from, March to July, how did all that work?
I could tell you a little bit about my mindset. And I think this is it's obviously a very personal decision. And so I think I want to take a step back and think about, let me just tell you a little bit about myself and how I came into medicine. And because it really was, even before this recruiter interaction that I had 18 months ago, there was a lot of self-reflection. And that was also in the setting of COVID. And I think a lot of people did a lot of self-reflection, and I did as well. And, I was thinking about what happened, why I even went into medicine, and thinking about even as a child, I always wanted to be a scientist. I had no idea what a scientist was. There was no scientist in my family, no physicians in my family, extended family, no potential influence. But I was the kid, crawling under the deck, looking for bugs and looking under my microscope of what they are. I was very curious. I was a very curious, sort of odd child. You probably can picture this. That was what I wanted to do, was science. I mean, I even found an essay I wrote to college when I was going through papers at home about, I want to be a research scientist, and my sort of very naive description of what this looks like. And then as I was going along, I learned why, right? I wanted to medicine, I completely fell in love with medicine and the idea of I can do science and it could help people. Yes, please. That sounds amazing. So that was why. And then, as I was going through training in medical school, I learned too. I learned that from another mentor of mine, when you're deciding about where you're going to specialize, you not only have to love the disease, but you have to love the whole package, the patients and everything that comes along with them. And for me, it was always the liver. I mean, from day one, those were my people. So that became very clear, and I had all that figured out. And then finally, how do I want to do this? And then I was thinking, and in this time in COVID and everything gets flipped upside down, what is it that I really love about my work in academic medicine? And how do I want to do science? And it was the mentoring. It was the team science. And the thing that really killed me in COVID was the lack of interaction with my colleagues. And I'm not talking the colleagues I had in Boston because, I was at a smaller academic center in Boston where I was the expert in fatty liver. So I didn't have a lot of sparring partners in my back pocket. So where I got that was going to meetings. And I felt such an emptiness in COVID times, not being able to go to meetings and have these interactions with the, all the people that come on the podcast with you, right? These are the people that I love to see and to chat about science the whole time, in between sessions, after sessions, before sessions, during, and it's so much fun. So I realized that for me, how I wanted to do science was very collaborative. And, I wanted to be talking about fatty liver disease on a high level as much as I could. I mean, those were the things that really made me happy. And of course, I love seeing patients, and I still get to see patients. We can talk about that. But for me personally, seeing patients wasn't the thing that really drove me to happiness. It was really thinking about science on this high level. That was sort of the context. And then Caroline Fox, another nugget of wisdom was, look, she said to me, I find people on LinkedIn. So you need to come up with a LinkedIn, make a LinkedIn profile. So I literally went onto her LinkedIn profile and I saw how she did it, and I did it the same way. And I said, okay, let's just sit there and see what happens. And a recruiter for Novo Nordisk reached out to me that way. And I deleted it and went about my day. And then I was like 3:00 in the morning. I don't sleep so well. And I got to thinking, wait a second, that was Novo Nordisk. And they're doing a lot in fatty liver disease. And they're aligned with leaders in metabolic health. And this is right in the square of where, what you find interesting and what you've been studying from all the epi work you've been doing in the Framingham Heart Study. Why did you delete that? Why not just give them, why not just see what they have to say? And so that's how it started. And I mean, I totally went in blind. I called the recruiter back and said, okay, let's have a first conversation. And, we had a conversation, and she ended the call saying, this job is in Copenhagen. And I'm like, no, I did not know this job was in Copenhagen. So that was interesting too. And then I said, look, I'm not going to be able to change locations because I have young kids and I'm married to a physician, and that's complicated. And so if you want to consider me further, this has to be a remote position. And that also became a possibility as as our conversations continued. And so that's how we got to the setup that I have today.
What was it in the process of the conversations that enticed you?
I was extremely naive. I mean, to some extent, I still am, right? I'm learning every day about what industry is, and we do not educate our trainees enough about it. It is a total black box, and it's super complicated, especially for a huge organization, big pharma, because there's roles and jobs within the company that you have no idea about. And so first, I had some initial conversations with the recruiter, and then I got to talk to the people that I would be working with who are actually hiring me at this level. I went through a few rounds of interviews with the recruiter mostly. And it was those conversations where finally, of course, this is all happening, on European time. So after I have the conversation, I go and wake my husband up at 6:00 in the morning saying, oh boy, I think I kind of want this job now. But it was really that turned it for me, because I saw that the position that I would be in basically the part of the organization where they're actively designing the trials and sitting amongst a group of physicians who are talking and thinking about fatty liver disease every day. And then they also had, knowing that I was making this transition from industry, they had a colleague, or who's now a colleague, come on, who had made this transition 1 year prior to also, help see things from my perspective. And what he said to me, he's like, Michelle, it's unbelievable. The environment is so rich. You get to start at the highest level of having these conversations. It's really, really surprising and impressive. And it's really, really fun. It really spoke to me in this post-COVID or state of this is exactly what I've been craving. This is exactly how I like to do science. And if you say that there are people, awake in Denmark at 6:00 in the morning who want to talk about fatty liver on a high level with me, yes, please, I'm there. And so that really is what sold it to me, because at the same, I realized that I could be doing all the things that I love, helping the patients that I love, still going to the conferences, interacting, doing all those things that I like, being really in the weeds in, a disease that is fascinating and potentially have an even bigger impact. once I became interested, it became very, very difficult to talk me out of it.
So you said you were naive and that in academia, you don't teach your trainees about this kind of stuff. Scroll back 3 years, and what do you wish you were imparting to your trainees at that point in time, based on what you know now?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even just a general overview of like what these different functions are, within a pharma company. Like, what is medical affairs? What is research and early development? What do they do? What does it look like there if you work in regulatory affairs? Or, I think my bias was that it's all commercial and that you have to have like a business degree in order to make a splash and to be seen as valuable. But now I see, I jokingly call it Novo Nordisk University. I mean, it is as rich a research environment that I have ever been in and I could ever dream of being in. I had no idea that that was the case before, 3 years ago, for sure. So I wish there was more opportunities. I mean, some companies actually have these opportunities where you can, do these sort of externship rotations. And I really wish I would have done it. Although, I wouldn't go back at all on my transition because I do think, having this solid base in academia was essential to my success. So I'm glad things worked out the way that they did, but I think it would have helped me be less nervous about making this change had I known more.
That's interesting. I listened to you say that, and the metaphor that came to mind was scuba diving. Do you dive?
I snorkel.
Okay, this is a little different. If I think, maybe not. If you scuba dive and you're out in the ocean on a choppy day and you come up, then the water will wash over you and you will be underwater again, and then you'll come up. And if you're underwater looking straight up, which I don't think you can do very much when you're snorkeling, or certainly not as much, you realize that when you're underwater, the surface is virtually a reflection or refraction, and you have no clue of what's going on in the air. And then when you're up in the air and you look down, you can see pattern, you can see things in the water. You're describing academia in a way that feels to me like being right under the surface and not having any clue of what's on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I've interacted. I had industry grants. I had lots of interactions with industry, but then I really didn't understand how it worked. It also reminds me of the first day of medical school where the dean comes in and says, congratulations, you've just made a huge investment in a career that you have no idea about. And that's also how I felt when I took this job, because I said, I'm doing this, I had to tell all my colleagues and explain what I was doing. But even then I was like, I think it's this. Like, I still didn't even have much of a clue as to what I was doing. And some people who knew a little bit more than I did were saying, well, it sounds like you're in this part of the company. And I'm like, maybe. Like, I really didn't even know, which is sort of funny looking back. It was a similar sort of leap of faith that I took.
What is it that would make one person in academia a really good candidate to go into commercial and be successful, and another one not so much? What would be the differences between those two people, or their two perspectives?
I think that it is challenging. If you are really driven by seeing patients, that's what makes you happy as your primary thing that really gets you up every day. You're not going to be able to do that if you're in industry to the same extent that you did before. Now, for me personally, I was mostly pursuing a research career. I was 90% research funded. I had a half-day clinic and a half-day of procedures a week. So I had pretty minimal clinical time, and I'm actually still maintain a half-day patient panel at the hospital. So I still do that now moving forward, and you can arrange that potentially. You have to figure it out, but that was an option for me, and I really liked having that option. So that could be an issue. I think that if you're establishing yourself, it's better. For me, I was able to come into this position at a higher level, because I was well established already in the field, and so that also helped. It is a very collaborative team science type of environment, but that being said, you don't always get external credit for your ideas or contribution. So, you may be spending all day, every day working on a project, and this is how it is at a big pharma company. Like, you're probably not going to be first author on that because there are other people that will take that position. So you have to be, okay with that. I think that can be really challenging, especially when a lot of your pride that you've taken in academics is in your publications. So that is something that, you really need to consider, I think, when you're transitioning over as well.
So What is the psychic reward that you get being in industry that replaces the psychic reward you got by being first author?
The fact that you get to do so much so quickly. Now, my colleagues say, oh, we don't move as fast as we want to. And I'm like, you have no idea. From my perspective, this is light speed. So that to me makes up for all of it. I talked to you about Caroline, I had rich mentors and I saw how much joy they got out of my success. And I feel the same way now. It's almost like I have all these people around me that I'm, it's almost the whole therapy area I'm sort of mentoring. And if we're successful there, like I'm happy. That was something I needed to really reflect on. For me, it is extremely personally satisfying doing this kind of work every day and having these interactions like I get to have now.
So that was the easy one. Is there anything you had to give up in the transition that you miss?
I guess before, I would write a lot of grants. I mean, that was a lot of what I was doing. And it's, as much as it's painful, it's also very fun because you get to propose things that are really innovative. You still get to do that. I mean, I guess that's a bad example because I still get to do that, but it's a little bit less so. Now people bring us their ideas and I help together like shape it. And so I do sort of get that satisfaction. And then I've also been helping to drive some truly innovative things within our company. So I can't say that I'm missing that. It's hard. That's a hard one. I mean, and I still get to see patients. That also was super important to me and also helps me like keep that identity and closeness. I think a lot of people would probably say the not seeing patients anymore. It's such a big part of your training. And I feel very fortunate that I'm able to. And part of the reason why I'm able to is because I work for a European company and I'm based in the US. And so my afternoons tend to be very flexible. And so I can find the time to continue to, I actually have a volunteer position at the hospital. I've kept my academic title and I still have some fellows and PhD students that I mentor in that capacity. That might be more challenging if my company was based in the US, for example, and I have a full work week, then you'd have to really negotiate for that. But again, this was a learning from my mentor, Caroline Fox, who did just that. And she maintained her clinic in diabetes for many years into her transition into industry. So it is possible to do that.
First of all, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much. This is a picture people don't get to see very often, or they get to see it from one individual's point of view and all those biases. So this has been great. What other advice would you give people in, let's start on the academia side, people in academia who want to transition or want to set themselves up in a position to be open to transition? What are the important things that they should do?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think making a name for yourself, getting out there, networking, all of that you're doing in academia is also very helpful for a career in industry, especially if you're, going to be working in industry in the same disease area as you've been mostly clinically interested in, because all of those connections really help you. I would say that simple practical advice, a LinkedIn page was helpful for me. Maybe it'll be helpful for you. So that could be good. And, getting involved with investigator-initiated studies or talking with companies about if you have a clinical trial program. I think that also helps if you don't know much about industry. That could be a way to be introduced at least to some aspects of industry and give you some context about what this could look like, and also just shows your interest in drug development if that's where you want to go. But then don't be afraid to reach out to people. I mean, certainly me, of course, but other people, that you meet and just ask them, like you go to the booth and say, we can talk about your drug or whatever, but can I also ask you a personal question? I would always be very happy to answer questions like that. And I never thought to do that. I wonder why, because I think people are happy to talk about their lives, and you can learn a lot just from talking to people and asking. So I would say be bold and just ask. Okay,
so now let's flip the script, right? So you're now sitting in a corporate position, and you will, if you're not already, be evaluating other people who might make the kind of transition that you've made. What tells you that they will do well as compared to they might not?
You have to understand the reasons why they might be wanting to look for a career change. For me, I was very clear when this job was being presented that I wasn't looking to change my career. They also thought, oh, well, that's actually kind of nice because it just means you are happy, and we like people who aren't happy and burnt out. So I think, be careful and reflective around that, because there's certain issues that maybe are frustrations to you and maybe driving change. And you have to really understand, will that be better in this new career? You need to do your research on that, depending on what your reasons are. So I think that would be important. Now I'm sitting in medicine and science. So this is where we're really designing the study, all the human trials. So a strong science background would be really important, and, demonstrating a knowledge of how clinical trials work just generally. I mean, I think that would be really helpful. So if you've been a site investigator or a co-investigator or something like that, that type of experience actually is really important to have.
Okay, great. One more question. And this is probably the most hypothetical. No, this is the one truly hypothetical question I've asked you, okay? How does your experience differ from what you anticipate somebody would get if they went into a small company? Say a company with either one product in market or no product in market developing their first product.
Oh, I'm sure it looks very, very different. There's a lot of security in a big company. And for me, that was very comfortable to make this change. I mean, there's a lot of what I do that doesn't feel at all different from what I did before. That being said, then there's bureaucracy and steps and all these other things that you get in a large organization. In a smaller company, you have the chance to actually move much faster. I mean, over the course of days, you could change the direction of your company. And we've seen this. So I think that could be very exciting. But then it also, there's a lot of stakes, that you have to take into account as well. There's maybe less security, or, if you don't know if you have a budget a year or 2 years down the line, I mean, that could be uncomfortable. That certainly would be uncomfortable for me, but maybe you're the type of person that really thrives in that kind of environment. And I think that kind of environment really, really breeds innovation and resourcefulness and could be really exciting. Personally, I'm not there yet, but who knows, where this will take me now from here.
So I'm going to shift gears. You've had several different vantage points from which to look at everything that's going on in the space right now. What are the 2 or 3 things that our listeners should be thinking about for major events in fatty liver or steatotic liver disease in the next year? Other than the obvious one is there's resmetirom PDUFA date. Okay. Once you get past that, what are 2 or 3 things you think will happen in 2024 that will really shape the entire space?
We, and this is also a reflection from the recent FDA workshop. One of my reflections from that was that there was a call to action. I mean, there really was people coming together saying, okay, we've had this conversation. Let's keep the momentum going. We think, we have something to show you. And it's, of course, I can't convince you in a 15-minute presentation that we have anything, that there's consensus. But it really did sound to me from there that the people in the field really want to come together and have these conversations and are ready to start coming to consensus. I don't know if that's going to happen by the end of 24. I certainly hope it does. But I think if it doesn't happen so that the world sees, I'm pretty certain it'll be happening in the background. It's just whether or not that product is there to show. But there's going to be a lot more collaborations around moving the field and really shifting the field and learning, from over the last, 10 years. So I just think it's a super exciting time to be here.
So if you're allowed to answer this question, what percentage of your time do you anticipate will be spent on that issue over the next year?
I think it'll be a lot of my time will be spent on that. I mean, it's fun and it's needed, and I won't be able to keep myself away.
Yeah, and by the way, practically you shouldn't, because at the end of the day, the manufacturers will benefit from this, A, from it happening, and B, from knowing exactly how it's happening and what to do, probably as much as or more than anybody else. So that's great. You have anything else you want to add before we're done? I think it's been a fantastic conversation. I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast in academia will get a tremendous benefit out of hearing it. It'll raise some questions, it'll answer some questions, but I think it'll be great for them. You have anything else you want to touch on today?
No, I think I just want to reiterate that it's okay to not know what these careers look like, but don't be afraid to ask. I'm putting myself out there. You can come and find me. I'm always happy to talk about this transition and what it's like, because, you really do need to be proactive about seeking these types of experiences and engagements. We also just as a community need to be open to other pathways in science that might speak to people. So I hope that we can do that better moving forward.
Is it appropriate if they just find you through your LinkedIn page?
I think they should find me through LinkedIn.
Michelle, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this interview. And I look forward to seeing you next month in Boston. I'm certain you'll be there. Yeah.
Yes, that'll be just down the road.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks,
you.
Roger.
And now for the Season 4, Episode 43 Business Report.
Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. This week, a tale from three perspectives. One, the U.S. Congress, where a minority of House Republicans are threatening not to let any Ukraine aid bill come up for a vote on the House floor. Two, scenes from one of the most egregious Russian attacks on civilians in this war with over 50 killed, including lots of children, at a otherwise tranquil cafe. And three, an increasing sense from multiple sources that while the counteroffensive may not achieve all its goals this year, Ukraine is loosening Russian hold on some Ukrainian territory, notably including early signs of slippage in Crimea, and also amid signs of lessening in Russian confidence. If we and the rest of the West have the patience to stay the course, we may see the day where, as Ukrainian aid director Tetiana Deshko said in our podcast this past summer, free Ukrainians welcome us to their liberated homeland. Slava Ukraini.
Not only is it our first week of interviews, but we tried a different approach to content.
Instead of focusing on the science of fatty liver or steatotic liver disease, call it what you will, we're looking at how people find and advance careers in two different corners of commercial medical development, entrepreneurship and big pharma R&D. Our guests, Rachel Zayas and Michelle Long, are no strangers to listeners to the podcast, but the stories they tell are quite different from anything you've heard from them before. We are working to determine unique ways the individual interview format can bring value to our listeners. Please let us know what you think about this one.
Episode planning for 2024 is starting now.
As the world of steatotic liver disease becomes more complex and as the first MASH drugs head towards market, we anticipate an explosion of topics next year. With an anticipated 25 full episodes plus convention coverage, we are looking to create 3, 4, 5, 6, what we call story arcs, episodes over the course of the year that cover a specific topic or issue. If you work in a drug, diagnostic, or device company, expect an email from me with more on this topic in the next 2 weeks. And whether you do or not, if you hear this and you have a story arc or a set of issues you'd like us to make sure to cover next year, please send me an email at questions@surfingnash.com and we'll look.
Again, no vault this week.
We're still sorting out how to deploy the vault on interview weeks. Since we have nothing in the past that corresponds to this topic, we decided to give the vault keeper a week off. So that's it for this week. I want to thank our team, Joran, Louise, Jake, Mike, Eric, Steve, for their work in getting us to interview week and for the planning that we're all doing right now for 2024. Next week, we will be back with another issue of interest. We have two possibilities. We're trying to see which one of those works out. You'll find out on Wednesday. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you next week on the podcast. Bye-bye now.
Have any questions for the surfers? You can send them to surfingnash.com and we will answer on the podcast or the website.